But then there's this entire other picture or piece of the picture, which is the strategy, which is just not taught in high school. It's like, oh, we can do really, really well in high school, but those two things are just not super correlated. That's just a huge mistake because it's going to burn the student out, and it's not an efficient way of actually making progress. They are a lot of times able to put in a good 4 or 6 week sprint, but by the end of it, they're fully burnt out, and it's just efficiency. And just don't do that 6 to 12 months of preparation when you could do 6 to 8 weeks instead.
Remember, you don't have to play the game the way the system wants it to, the way it's set up. You can find the foundation, you can build the skills, and you can get the results without the burnout. All right. Good evening. Welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Sebastian. Today, I am interviewing Carson Weekly. Next hour, I'll be walking you through the exact system he uses to add 5+ points to students' ACT scores in just 4 to 8 weeks, and why most families are wasting thousands on test prep that actually doesn't work. So this is not theory. This is actually what gets results. So again, welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. I'm Dr. Joe Sebastian. Families often ask me how to navigate the maze of college prep without wasting thousands of dollars and years of time. The answer usually involves finding the people who have figured out the rules of the game that schools aren't telling you. And that's why I am thrilled to have Carson Weekly here today. Carson is the founder of Boosted Brains, a UChicago economics graduate, and someone who has scored a perfect 36 on the ACT over a dozen times. But here's what makes him different. He built a system called the ACT hacking system that has helped thousands of students improve their scores by an average of 5 points, with some students unlocking $50,000 to $88,000 in scholarship money. We're going to dive into how the ACT actually works, why most test prep is fundamentally broken, and what your family should be doing instead. Carson, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dr. Joe. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Carson Weekly, as Dr. Joe introduced. Like he said, I'm the founder of Boosted Brains, and we help high school students get significantly better ACT scores. I personally struggled on the ACT the first time I took it myself. I wasted over 100 hours studying the normal prep methods, open up prep booklets and just wasting time until I found a more efficient way of doing things. And then ultimately scored myself a perfect 36. That opened up doors to a lot of colleges that I wouldn't have otherwise had the chance to get into, and ended up grabbing a University of Chicago degree. Since then, I've taken the ACT a bunch of times, scored a dozen perfect 36s, and now we've built out a really good system here at Boosted Brains. We've helped, like he said, thousands of families. Over 250 of our students have scored above a 30 on the ACT, collectively grabbing over somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars of scholarships. And that's our goal, is to help students unlock schools, better scholarships, and ultimately give themselves the most options possible.
That's all right. That's an amazing story. Everyone sees the perfect 36 and the results your students are getting, but I kind of want to deconstruct the engine behind that. And so let's start with what actually got you here. So, you said you scored a perfect 36 multiple times on the ACT, but you also say you weren't able to do this. Walk us through what changed.
So the first time I walked in and I took the ACT, I was a good high school student, and I was just expecting that because I did well in high school, I was just going to naturally do well on the ACT. But as pretty much everyone who's taken any of these standardized tests has seen, high school doesn't really prepare you at all for standardized tests. I say now that the ACT has two separate parts to it. It has content on the one hand, and it has strategy on the other hand. High school will teach you a lot of the content, not necessarily all of the content, but it'll teach you a lot of the content here on this hand. But there's just a strategy for taking the ACT that is not ever taught in high school. And that's what I realized the first time I walked in, and I ran out of time on the math section. I didn't have any idea how to approach the reading section of the test, and had to pretty much go back to the drawing board. So I did what most people do. My high school counselor told me to just pick up one of those big red ACT prep booklets that's like that thick, 500 pages, and just start ripping through a bunch of the practice tests. That didn't help me at all. Actually, I wasted a bunch of time doing that and was still at a 31, even after spending all that time doing it. And it wasn't really until I actually looked at all of those practice tests that I took and realized that there were a lot of patterns in the types of questions that showed up, and realized that I really needed to come up with that strategy that I talked about for approaching some of those types of questions. Like if you can figure out that there's really only 30 different questions that show up kind of again and again and again on the English section of the test, if you could just have a process for attacking each one of those 30 types of questions so that when you see it show up the next time, it's just kind of an automatic, like, oh, I know that this is a subject verb agreement question. Therefore, I'm going to look for, does the subject match the verb? And then I'm going to, answer accordingly. And if you just have a process like that for each and every question, you build that into your muscle memory, then, the test is going to be something that comes a lot more naturally.
So, what makes your approach to ACT prep fundamentally different than Kaplan, than Princeton Review, or like a $200 an hour private tutor who would just teach it?
Well, yeah. So I think you may have to take it a little bit kind of case by case for each one of those, I guess, other alternatives. But really what we do is we analyze where a student is in terms of their current strengths and their weaknesses. Like I said, if there are 30 different types of questions on the English section, a student may already know how to do 18 of them. So we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time working on those first 18 types of questions. We're going to work on the last 12 that they really need in order to finally get all of the questions correct on the English section. And so we are very targeted and very personalized with each student who comes into our program. And so, every single student that comes in, we give them a full diagnostic test, and then we give them a full strengths and weaknesses analysis. So it's not that we're just saying, hey, here's our Carson Weekly's class, and you're going to come in with 30 other students, and just, we're going to teach you everything you need to know on the ACT, because everyone needs to know something different in order for their time to be spent most efficiently. And so that's probably how we differ from some of the bigger name, more group style classes. And in terms of tutoring, I actually have an interesting take on tutoring. I started out as a tutor myself, and I was working with kids, charging them the hour, charging their parents by the hour. And funny enough, when early on, one of my students was going through the process, and he wasn't necessarily doing all of the work outside of our tutoring sessions that I would have expected or would have wanted from a student who was going to make significant improvement on the test. And so I wasn't really expecting a great result the first time he took the test, even though we'd been working together for a few months. And we were, I guess he got his results back, and he had improved, I think, like 1 or 2 points from his starting score, which, as you pointed out, we're shooting for 4, 5, 6, or even more, extra points on the ACT. So 1 or 2 points is not a significant improvement in my book. And so I set up a call with his mom to kind of talk about the results. And I was expecting, a lot of disappointment and a lot of negativity. And what actually ended up happening was the mom said, hey, this is, okay. It's pretty good progress. I'm glad that we're moving in the right direction. Now let's go from meeting for 2 hours every week to, we were just meeting, twice a week for 1 hour at a time. So 2 hours per week. Let's go from meeting twice a week to meeting 4 times per week. And let's bump it up to 2 hours every session. So I went from working with this kid for 2 hours a week to working with a kid for 8 hours a week. So I 4x'd the number of hours and billing cycles that I was able to have from this student, even though he didn't improve as much as I would have wanted him to. And if he had gotten a great score the first time around, then I would have not been able to make any more money from that family. And that's just the reality of the business. And that's the reality of how hourly tutoring is structured. So now, we actually, after having that experience, we now have a different pricing structure where we align our incentives with the family's incentives.
Yeah.
The student wants to get the ACT done as quickly as possible. We want the same thing. So we really provide unlimited support, unlimited access, unlimited coaching um, for the duration of the program that students are in for us with. And that aligns our incentives with the family's incentives, because it's like if we can get things done in 6 weeks, that gets a student a great result. We're happy with that. It gets them off of our plate as well, and the student is really happy with that because they don't have to take the ACT any more times. So that's kind of how we long-winded answer there, but that's how we differentiate ourselves in terms of the model itself.
That coaching versus tutoring distinction is something we talk about a lot. Actually, I talk about it constantly because I do believe the hourly tutoring model is fundamentally broken. It is actually financially incentivized to keep students dependent, right? Like, and honestly, you want to make more money. They value the sessions, but you're basically saying the same thing from the side, is that you're more or less guaranteeing an outcome over sessions, right? Like, if I can get the results in a shorter amount of time, why don't we just do that?
Right, exactly. If you're trying to renovate your house and your general contractor comes and says, "Hey, we're going to charge you by the hour or by the week that we're doing this, and you're going to pay us $1,000 a week, and we don't really know how long it's going to take," then you're probably going to go to a different general contractor.
Right. I mean, it's hard because I think we're so wired to just think in terms of hourly tutoring because it's so ingrained, but it is kind of antiquated in that way. So you obviously figured out the system. Let's kind of break it down for the parents listening. You call the ACT hacking system. If a student came to you today, you call it the ACT hacking system. If a student came to you today with a 24 and said, "I want a 30 or higher than a 30," what's the first thing you diagnose, and like where do you start?
Yeah. So the very, very first thing that we do is, like I mentioned, we're going to give you a diagnostic test. So in order to really create a roadmap for us to go from 24 to 30, we need to know where we are right now. Right. It's just like, if you're going on a road trip, or even if you're just going down to the grocery store, and you get in your car, we've all got the Apple CarPlay, and it pulls up the map. It needs to find your location of where you are right now before it can give you a map to get to where you're going to go as efficiently as possible. And so that's the very first thing we're going to do. And really, that's the first step of our process, is just find the question types that are what we call lowest hanging fruit. So it's where is our student missing a lot of questions? What types of questions are we missing most often? And also, how often do those question types show up on the ACT? Because you may have no chance of getting a an ellipse question correct on the math section. But if that question only shows up once on the entire test, that might not be a high priority question. So that's the very first thing we do, is diagnose all the strengths and weaknesses, and then lay those out in terms of highest priority down to lowest priority.
And I guess break that down. You said like there's the ACT has thousands of questions, but only like 15 to 20 question types per section. So that changes everything about how students should prepare. Break down what does that actually mean or look like in practice.
For example, like I said, on the English section, there may be only 30 or so types of questions. And so when we get a student's diagnostic test, we can figure out, hey, is it these subject verb agreement questions that we only got 30% of these correct, and they show up all the time. And so that would be a high priority question. That's going to be rank pretty highly. And then what we do is, from there, if a student misses a lot of those questions, we're going to work specifically on practice drills on subject verb agreement. And we're going to work on both what that question type looks like how do we know that it's a subject verb agreement question? And then as soon as we recognize that it's a subject verb agreement question, what do we need to do in order to solve it correct? What are the grammar rules, or what are the strategies or the tips and tricks that we can use to eliminate answer choices or whatever it may be to most efficiently solve that question? And then, since we're working specifically on subject verb agreement questions, we're not necessarily working on everything on the English section all at the same time. At times we will do that, but when we're really trying to build muscle memory on subject verb agreement questions, we're going to work just specifically on building the muscle memory there by just repetitive practice of how do we recognize this question? How do we solve it when it looks a little bit different? What are the different variations of this type of question? And until it really just becomes second nature. And after a day or two, a couple hours of practicing, a student can just recognize they go in, they see a new variation of subject verb agreement, and they know exactly what they need to do. And it's automatic. They don't even really have to think twice about it. It's just like how, a lot of our students are student athletes. And for every single student athlete, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're a basketball player, you've practiced your free throw shot a million times before. And by the time you get to a game, you're not really thinking about the angle of your wrist or how hard you need to. And forgive me for a terrible basketball shot because I'm not a basketball.
You're good. There's so many parallels to what we do with the AP program in terms of that pattern recognition and practicing the skills. It's so much more than just content, right? And so there are ways, it sounds like, to hack the exam through some repetitive practice of knowing exactly what your weaknesses are and building up those skills. And so, reading a lot of, I'm trying to work with a lot of similar students that we do, high GPA students. Some of them tank different sections. And so if we're talking about students with a 4.0 GPA scoring 22s on the ACT, why does this happen and how do you fix that?
That's a great question. And we do see it all the time. That's kind of our main student population that we work with. We see a lot of students who come in with 30s and they're looking for 34s. And we work with a lot of them. But I say 60% of our students probably are students who come in for us. They're 4.3 students and they have between a 22 and a 24 on the ACT. And kind of, it's a similar thing to what I was saying about myself back in the day when I realized that I just went into the ACT assuming that because I was a good student in high school, that I was going to do well on the standardized test. But it's because the ACT tests both content and strategy. And even if, I'd say that high school teaches you a lot of the content, but when there's 3 years of it covered on the ACT, it's still probably not sufficient to just assume everything content wise from high school. Right. But then there's this entire other picture or piece of the picture, which is the strategy, which is just not taught in high school. And so it's honestly like when we break it down like that, it makes a lot more sense. It's like, oh, we can do really, really well in high school, but those two things are just not super correlated. It would be like if you haven't specifically prepared for the ACT, it would be like showing up to your pre-calc final without having taken pre-calc throughout the entire year. It's a completely separate test that you have to prepare for specifically as if it were its own class.
Right. Okay. And so that is, again, a parallel that we have. And the, I guess, with students getting those grades, but still struggling on the ACT kind of mirrors what we see with the APs here. It's not really about memorization, not about content. It's not even about grades, really. It's just kind of building those skills under pressure. But walk me through your sprint model where you do these in 4 to 8 week intensives instead of 6 to 12 months of prep. How are you getting those results in that short amount of time? And what does a typical week look like for a student you're working with?
Yeah, great question. And so we actually started working in this sprint model mostly because we found that students don't want to study for the ACT for 12 months. And this is maybe it comes down to my sister runs track, and I ran track way back in the day. I played baseball more seriously, but nobody likes long distance, really. We there are the people who run marathons and run 5Ks and stuff like that, but long distance kind of sucks. And so most students are much better at finishing a sprint and committing to going all out in a short sprint than they are for a marathon, especially when it's a marathon with no real end in sight. So what we do is we target a specific test date that's about 6 or 8 weeks out in the future. Typically 6 weeks is a really good sweet spot. And because we have that, 6-week window of time that the student knows about, we know about as coaches, and the parents know about, we're able to really go all in, and the student is able to, sprint a lot faster, knowing that there's a finish line there that's only 6 weeks away. And so we're able to put in a lot of good concentrated work over that period of time, compared to a lot of the programs where it's, hey, we're going to do once a week tutoring or twice a week tutoring for 6 months or 12 months. We are doing work every single day. Most of our students are doing somewhere around an hour per day of work. Of course, it does depend on, the student situation, yeah, and we're flexible to schedules and everything. But if we're able to put in about an hour per day of good, consistent work over 6 weeks, that's a huge amount of time to build really good muscle memory. And I'll always come back to the sports analogies because I played baseball, but
Yeah.
like if you're thinking about your baseball specifically, if you were to only practice your swing or your throwing once a week or twice a week,
Right.
you're not going to build any muscle memory whatsoever. You're going to take one or two steps forward during your lesson or during your practice, and then you're going to take one or two steps backward during the week when you're not practicing and you're resting for those 5 or 6 other days of the week. And so that's why a lot of normal preparation over the course of 12 months doesn't work, because it's too spread out. Whereas on the other hand, when we're working, a student comes into our program, they have a roadmap that shows them exactly what they're doing on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it's all building upon one another. Every day is building upon the last. And so Monday, we may make a little bit of progress, we take a step forward, and then Tuesday, we take a step forward building off of that progress from Monday. So it's not like we're, going through this one step forward, one step backward, two steps forward, half a step backward. We're just consistently making progress every single day. And again, it all kind of ties into our model of, we're providing unlimited support. So like our
Yeah.
coaches are messaging with our students every single day. They're sending videos, voice memos, they're meeting on Zoom, and they're making sure that any question that a student has is answered as quickly as possible so it doesn't become a roadblock. So again, if a student has a question on a worksheet that they're working on Tuesday, they're not waiting until next Sunday when they're meeting with their tutor. They're getting a question answered Tuesday afternoon so that Wednesday they can work on a different problem rather than, still being stuck on that whatever they had that question on Tuesday. And so
So
that
yeah.
a typical process looks like is we just roll right on through and continue making progress until test day.
So that unlimited support, there's a blend of synchronous and asynchronous communication and check-ins. So like how does that work? And how does that end up being more valuable than paying someone by the hour or just having an hourly tutoring session?
So of course, when you have an hourly tutoring session, the tutor is incentivized, one, to have more of those hourly tutoring sessions. And even though those tutoring sessions may not be the most useful, if you're just sitting there together with a tutor and they're kind of spoon feeding you information, that tutor is just basically putting the answer on a silver platter for you, then you're not really building up the muscle memory to do it on your own. The tutor is not going to be there when you're taking the ACT unless you've got some unique situation worked out where where they're able to take the test for you. But yeah, if your tutor's not going to be there in the testing center with you, then you should be practicing a lot and doing a significant amount of practice without your tutor there. And the other thing is if you have access to message your tutor at any point in time, or you message really what we call them coaches, message one of our coaches at any point in time, then we're able to get an answer back to you right away. So we have students who they're working on a ACT worksheet during a free period at 11:30 in the morning. They have a question on something, or we can actually just go in and see that they may have missed two questions on that worksheet. We'll send them a voice note or a video explanation saying, hey, Johnny, this is why we missed those two questions. This is what we need to do instead to avoid making that mistake. And they may have that video if they miss those questions at 11:30 in the morning, they may have that video by 2:30 in the afternoon. And so by the time they get home from school at 3 o'clock or 3:30, they can now go review their mistakes and start working on doing those questions the right way and building the right muscle memory. That's just not going to happen if you have to set up a brand new tutoring session or whatever it may be, coordinate schedules with your tutor. You may not be able to get in with them until 3 days later, and that's 3 days of wasted time.
Right. Right. No, I like that a lot. That's essentially what we try to build with our program too, just more coaching over tutoring. What is the biggest mistake you see students making when it comes to ACT prep?
Yeah, so I think generally the biggest mistake that students make is so I guess there are two ends of the spectrum. On the one side, there are students who just wait way too long to get a plan in place, and they just kind of think, "Look, I'm going to pull out my prep booklet and I'll just start banging away and do some practice questions here or there," but they never really have a plan in place. I'd say that those students and those families are probably not the ones who are watching this. So on the other hand, the families who want to do something super intense and go all in and all overboard and do those 12-month preparation processes, and they just assume that longer is better. And it kind of comes from that, you were saying, the hourly tutoring mindset that's ingrained in people is just more time is better. And they just assume, oh, my student is starting junior year, it's junior year fall. Let's start tutoring now for the ACT and let's plan to take it in junior spring, 6 or 7 or 8 months later. And that's just a huge mistake, because it's going to burn the student out, and it's not an efficient way of actually making progress. And so we see a lot of students come to us later on in junior year or even fall of senior year, and they've been working with other programs for 8 months, 12 months, and the student is just burned out. And they come to us and they're like, they are a lot of times able to put in a good 4 or 6 week sprint, but by the end of it, they're fully burnt out. And most of the time, there was a student in Camden who I had a quick little interview with her after she did our program. She was exactly in this situation. She was like, "Man, if I had known about this short sprint model, I would have saved an entire year of my time and thousands of dollars of my parents' tutoring budget, because of how much they had spent working for an entire year in this program before coming to our short sprint model."
So I guess, why do you think I mean, you obviously have run a successful program for a couple years now, for several years now, excuse me. I see it too. It's hard to kind of call it out, but it does. I don't know if it gets old for you having the same kind of conversation over and over again with parents of just like, it's not all parents, right? But there are ones that are just looking for, like, they want the broken model. They want time. They want this time, and this, like, somehow more hours equates more success. And I'm like, so, it's a very big belief break, at least on our end, of, okay, my kid's spending 5 hours on a one AP subject every night. How are they going to fit this in? I'm like, well, do you think, like, that's probably the problem? Do you think you need 5 hours like, that's 25 hours a week if you're not doing weekends, right? Like, how is that even practical? And, like, when I'm like, well, how can you get them a 4 or 5? I need an 2 hour, maybe 2 hours per subject per week. How is that possible? Because we're not worried about content. We're teaching a system. We're teaching skills. And on if you just, and it's like, because I think, I'll let you answer. Let me be a bad podcaster. But I mean, I hear it so much and I say it so much. But it sounds so parallel to the conversations you have. What is your theory on that?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to want to just put your thoughts in, because I know it's something that we both hear all the time. And everybody in our company hears this as well, at least with students who are first joining the program and families who are first joining the program. I think it comes from a good place. It comes from parents who probably worked incredibly hard themselves and still probably do work incredibly hard themselves, and they've been rewarded for putting in a lot of hard work, either back when they were in school or in their jobs or whatever it is that they do. Hard work gets rewarded, and hard work is a great thing to be rewarded for. Um, But I think it can go down the wrong direction when it's like, hey, we don't need to be studying for 3 hours a day or 4 hours a day or 5 hours a day. Again, if you just come from the mindset of more work is better, then yeah, I guess it's an easy mindset to come from when you are a hard worker yourself and you've been rewarded for that. But you have to look at the efficiency of the work that's being done, and that's the biggest thing that I often say is there comes a point of diminishing and even negative marginal returns from more time. There was a student, was early on when I was kind of back in my tutoring days, named Vikram, and he, he and his parents, his dad was an incredibly hard worker himself, and he just assumed, more work is better. And so Vikram, he had his son Vikram working 2 hours a day every single day, and he wanted to do that for 6 months on the ACT. And I was, working with I wasn't doing 2 hours every single day of tutoring sessions with them, but I was, guiding them along the process. And his score actually went up at first. I think he started in maybe the mid 20s, and he had worked his way up to, I think, a 30 or 31 on some of our practice tests. But then, after 2 months or so of that 2 hours a day every single day, his scores actually started going back down in the negative direction, the upper 20s. And so that I guess that was just because he had fully burnt out. He was like, he would sit down to ACT practice and he just couldn't even stomach it. Like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid just isn't able to, they don't have the stamina to do that. And I don't have the mental stamina to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that either. So that's perfectly understandable. But when you contrast that with another student that I worked with at the time, named Carter, he actually started out at a 23. He did a one short sprint for 6 weeks, and after that period of time, he went from a 23 to a 30. Vikram ended up, I think, scoring somewhere I think it was around a 27. And so smaller improvement, even with 10 times the number of hours. And I think I just have to bring up these kind of concrete examples to some of these families, who do value hard work, and that's a great thing. But those some of those beliefs do need to be broken around just more is better. I think efficient is better.
And so you're the system that's offering efficiency. And so, what is the big difference between a 10K program from like Princeton or Kaplan or something like that, or 6 to 10K, and what you're ultimately trying to do?
Yeah. So I guess I'm not super familiar with exactly what those programs offer. What would you say they?
Well, I think it's similar promises, right? That they're offering, like, I'll be honest, I'm more familiar with like Princeton's like 1400 guarantee program or 1500, something like that. But it's a big investment. I'm still sticker shocked by like, I have a webinar tonight, and I'll throw it up there of like, this is what Princeton charges, like 6K for their guaranteed 5, and ours is a fraction of that cost. I just think we have a better system.
Right.
Or maybe, but I ethically, as an educator, my kid's taking 5 APs, and they want 5s, and then is that 30K? And I'm like, okay, obviously Princeton maybe gets it, but I, you're attracting a very small margin of people who can actually afford that, when there's a lot of kids who could benefit from the help that they should be getting. So I guess, you're offering a different way. I guess just speak more about how it's a little more accessible for some of the families you work with.
And so we do definitely charge a premium. We're not nearly as high as some of the $10,000 programs out there normally in most circumstances. But we do offer a very good ROI for most of our families, and we try and position it that way, and we try and work with families who are going to benefit from, we guarantee 4 extra points on the ACT, and we work with families who are going to benefit from that in terms of better colleges, less time spent wasted, and ultimately more. The big financial ROI is going to be the increased scholarships that you get. There are tons of analyses that you could do on the value of an ACT point, extra ACT point. There was a study done a while back that shows that each extra point gives you about $8,500 in scholarships. And that was back in 2018, before a lot of the crazy inflation. So I think we conservatively estimate that each extra point now gives at least $10,000 in extra scholarships. And, you can see that in the ROI number. So if you come into our program, you add 4 or 5 extra points, that's conservatively 40 or 50,000 in scholarships. We've had students who have gotten way more than that. I think you mentioned one of our students got $88,000 at SMU. That was a student, Ava, years back. We recently had a student named Meredith grab a full scholarship, full tuition, full ride, housing, stipends, and everything at University of Kentucky. It's worth over $230,000. And so, yeah, we do charge. And so yeah, our program investment is in the thousands of dollars, but we definitely try and frame it as, hey, you're going to get a great return on this investment, and your kid's going to save a lot of time. You're going to, as a parent, you're going to save a lot of headache, and whether it is more college options or just significantly more scholarships, you're going to get both of them from coming into our program.
Love it. So we're going to move into lightning round. These are just rapid fire questions. First thing that comes to mind, no explanation needed unless you really want to. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
You ready? All right. I might throw one in there. All right, before I enter this, because I'm going to throw in a question not on my question bank, but are you a contributing alumni member of U Chicago?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll get to it in a second, because we have kids that go to U Chicago. So, okay, well, let me just start. Why is it called? Okay, I heard this now from multiple sources. Why is it known as the school where fun goes to die?
Where fun goes to die is because there's a lot of time spent in the library.
Isn't that like all top schools, or what is it about U Chicago that gets that association with it?
So I actually think most top schools, once you get there, a lot of the reputation, unless there are a few exceptions, but it's like Harvard schools, the reputation that I've heard, I can't speak because I didn't go to those schools, but the reputation that I've heard is that you get in, once your foot's in the door there, they really make it a lot easier to succeed. Okay. I can't say that was my experience at University of Chicago.
Did you spend a lot of time in the library though?
I spent a lot of time in the library, but I also found, some of my best friends there as well. And, I played baseball there too. And so I had a great group of friends on the baseball team that I enjoyed spending time with. But honestly, it's a very unique place, the University of Chicago. And I think if you're not somewhat of a unique person, then you may not thrive there.
They're gone away from score optional now. So Stanford this year changed their policy. If you take an AP course, you have to submit your scores. U Chicago is implementing that by next year. I expect all the Ivy Leagues to do the same, kind of moving pendulum swing back the opposite, not just no longer score optional for SAT, ACT, but also mandatory score reporting on your AP exams too. So, all right, sorry, I didn't want to set you up. That's like rapid fire. I'm like, that's what. Because I hear that a lot. What does that mean? Cool. All right. You ready?
Yep.
All right. Most overrated ACT prep strategy right now.
12 months of preparation.
One thing parents overthink about their kids' test scores.
Ooh, overthink. I'd say maybe the gap between 34 and 36.
What about one thing they underthink?
The value of instant feedback or rapid feedback cycles.
If you could whisper one piece of advice to the parent of a sophomore right now, what would it be?
Ooh, parent of a sophomore. I'd say if they've taken Algebra 2, I'd say start your ACT prep now. If they haven't taken Algebra 2, I would say go have them do something fun that they enjoy.
Best free resource for ACT prep that most people don't know about?
My YouTube channel.
There you go. Soft promo. One book or resource every high-achieving family should have.
One book or resource that every high-achieving family should have. I would say Grit by Angela Duckworth.
What's the next big shift you see coming in standardized testing?
I guess maybe I'll assume that I'm ahead of this, and I feel like it's already happening because I'm in the world, but I feel like the shift is just return to standardized test mandatory for college admissions.
All right. Well, Carson, this has been great. This has been very, very valuable. We have interviewed some people for SAT, but not a lot of ACT specialties. So I know parents are going to want to go deeper. So where is the best place for them to find you and find out what you offer and where to check you out at?
So we put out a ton of good informational content for free over on our YouTube channel. It's Boosted Brains 36. You could probably either YouTube search Carson Weekly or Boosted Brains 36 for the perfect ACT score. And same thing over on Instagram, Boosted Brains 36. And then if you're interested in more of our ACT coaching program and getting hands-on help from myself or my team, boostedbrains36.com is where you can learn more about all that stuff.
And before we wrap, what's the one thing you want people to remember from this conversation?
Man, it's just efficiency, and just don't do that 6 to 12 months of preparation when you could do 6 to 8 weeks instead.
Love it. Well, Carson, thank you. I do appreciate you sharing everything. I appreciate your time coming on. I know, it's in between test prep seasons for us, and it's always busy in the game. So, but for everyone listening, remember, you don't have to play the game the way the system wants it to, the way it's set up. You can find the foundation, you can build the skills, and you get the results without the burnout. I really like how Carson kind of framed it in that it's really a 6 to 8 week sprint, and those skills can stack very quickly. So we're going to put all the links that we discussed in the show notes. And again, thank you for tuning in to the Supported Learning podcast, and we'll see you next time. Carson, thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Absolutely.